This fall, Village of Barrington residents will be asked to vote on a home rule referendum. Communities over 25,000 residents automatically are home rule, but because Barrington has less than that, the village is asking the voters to decide. Here are a few facts. Home rule communities have a stronger local voice, with more flexibility to determine local solutions to address local issues. Home rule can provide more diverse revenue streams, giving the village more ability to manage growth in property taxes. Home rule also means less reliance on property tax, with greater financial support from all users, helping to maintain infrastructure like roads, sidewalks, bike paths, and public services. Most full-service communities in northeastern Illinois, those that provide police, fire, and water utility services, are already home rule. This includes many of our surrounding communities like Barrington Hills, South Barrington, Lake Barrington, Inverness, and others. So why isn't Barrington home rule? Well, this fall, you get to decide. Remember, early voting begins September 29th and Election Day is November 8th. Your vote matters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Himes. I'm the Communications Manager for the Village of Barrington. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that box if you click into it to ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those towards the end of the session. For now, I'd like to introduce Village President Karen Darch.
Great. Thank you, Kate, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time to join us tonight and learn about home rule. Our format tonight will be a presentation from our village manager, Scott Anderson, and then we will follow that with answering those questions that come in our Q&A. So without further ado, Scott Anderson, Barrington's village manager.
Thank you, President Darch. Get the presentation set up. Good evening. Thank you again for taking the time to join us tonight for this presentation. This is one of a series of meetings we are having with stakeholders within the community. We have 4 goals for tonight's presentation. The first is to explain the differences between a non-home rule community, which we are, and a home rule community. The second is to highlight why some communities are home rule and others are not. Part of the focus will be on the north and northwest suburbs, communities that are similar to Barrington in terms of service levels, infrastructure needs, and commitment to quality of life. The next goal is to address how being home rule provides more tools for local leaders to be more responsive to the stated desires of the community. And finally, review some common questions about home rule. As part of the discussion, we hope to dispel some of the myths and misconceptions that you may have heard about what home rule is and what it can do for the village. Sorry about that. In order for the voters to decide if the village should be a home rule municipality, the village board has placed a referendum question on the November 8th ballot. The question is straightforward and reads, proposition to grant home rule status to the village of Barrington. Shall the village of Barrington, Illinois become a home rule unit pursuant to Article 7, Section 6 of the Illinois Constitution with a denotion of yes or no? So what is home rule? Home rule is a type of governance that gives a municipality greater authority to shape local solutions to respond to local issues. In a home rule community, communities can make decisions that are specific to the current needs of the community, absent any violation of state or federal law. In a non-home rule community, there is much less flexibility to manage local affairs. Non-home rule communities can only take actions that the state has expressed direct permission to do so. And where the state is silent on an issue, home rule communities can enact legislation to solve a problem. Non-home rule communities cannot. Those problems could be environmental in nature, relate to crime prevention, or address nuisance property issues. These are just a few examples. Home rule communities also have the ability to generate more revenue from additional sources. Those new revenues can be allocated to roads, bike paths, sidewalks, as well as aesthetic and public space improvements. Home rule revenues, such as a home rule sales tax, serve two functions. It generates more revenue from visitors from surrounding communities. Those who visit and enjoy Barrington, they would share in the costs of infrastructure maintenance. Secondly, additional revenues from home rule will help to ease the burden on the village's portion of the property tax. So if home rule provides more local control over local issues, it can generate more revenue from those who live outside of the village. Wouldn't every community choose to be home rule? Yes, many communities have, 219 in fact. But to add some context, I also have to add a bit of history. So prior to 1971, home rule did not exist. All communities were required to follow the same set of rules. Solutions crafted by the state of Illinois applied to all municipalities regardless of the local needs. In 1971, the state was challenged by a group of communities that felt a one-size-fits-all approach to local governance was not an effective measure to meet the needs of individual governments. The state constitution was changed and home rule was created. There was one caveat though, a community had to be over 25,000 residents to automatically be granted home rule status. Communities with less than 25,000 must hold a referendum to let the community decide. This is the process the Village of Barrington has undertaken. So what makes 25,000 population the magic number? Well, there's no source information that I've seen that explains why 25,000 was chosen. Intuitively, I would surmise the communities that have a population that exceeds 25,000 are typically responsible for providing all major services, including police, fire, public works, and as a part of public works, snow removal, street repair, water delivery, and care of our urban forest. Home rule provides more flexibility to manage those critical services. It's not unusual for communities to become home rule through election. In fact, in this region, there have been 33 successful referenda to become home rule. As you look at this list of communities in the area, you will see that many of these towns now have populations that exceed 25,000. What is interesting about that fact is that those communities saw the benefit of being home rule and did not want to wait for the automatic classification that would be gained through population growth. As you can see by the bolded communities, the village is nearly surrounded by home rule. And if you zoom out to the greater region, the story is the same. There are 88 home rule communities in the north and northwest suburbs. This region is the largest percentage of home rule communities in the state. A vast majority of the home rule communities are full service communities. Full service communities are those that provide all major village services, police, fire, public works. So why is this important? We control the quality and level of services, and we can be more nimble to address the changing needs and expectation of our customers. In turn, we are also responsible for the cost of those services. Barrington is a full service community. We're also a very unique community. We are full service, which is unique for a size of our community. Many other towns of our size might contract out emergency medical services, fire suppression, police protection, and snow removal. They have little say in the level or quality of service. We are not home rule, and that's unique for a full service community. We also treat wastewater and deliver water to parts of neighboring communities, which is unique for any community. In fact, there are only 2, maybe 3 towns in the region that can check all those boxes. One of the reasons we are considering home rule is that we want to better meet the needs of the community. Over the last few years, we have engaged the public through surveys, listening sessions, and resident comments at board meetings, through engagement with myself or staff, or through expressed opinions on social media, with the end goal being the understanding of what's important to residents. Through home rule status, there's a greater ability to be for more local decision-making, to provide better tools to address local concerns by those who are accessible to you, whether it's 3 times a month at board meetings or while passing each other in the store. That ability to address some of the stated concerns of the public in part comes from the option to collect revenues from all users of village amenities. So I've mentioned a few times that home rule affords more local control. In this slide, I provided some concrete examples of those differences. The first one is spreading the tax burden from residents to non-residents through the sales, gasoline, and other local taxes. These were funds that shared funds would be used to further our infrastructure repairs. Another advantage of being a home rule community is entering into multiple year contracts. While this example is small in relation to the village-wide budget, in a recent example of a penalty we pay for not being able to look into multi-year contracts occurred just this recent Monday. The village board authorized a contract with a vendor for next year's 4th of July fireworks display. As we could not enter into a multi-year contract, we had to negotiate a contract in the midst of high inflation, employee shortage, fuel surcharges, and supply issues. The result is that the show will cost the village about 70% more than it did this year. The village is facing the same issue as it renegotiates all of its contracts on an annual basis. Multi-year contracts offer stability for budgeting and results in more competitive pricing. Some other advantages of being a home rule community is enacting rental housing and property maintenance rules. It does allow for the village to be more proactive in managing maintenance issue. It also allows for an aspect called crime-free housing. And within crime-free housing, the village can partner with landlords to ensure that language exists in leases that renters and or their guests agree to not commit major crimes, with the understanding that if they do, they are subject to eviction. They can also face eviction if there are multiple property offenses or multiple nuisance type complaints where the tenant is not being responsive. Some other advantages of being a home rule community is having more ability to manage the administration and police and fire departments. As a non-home rule community, we are not allowed to have anyone in the police or fire industry work beyond the age of 65. That really translates more to challenges with maintaining top talent at the chief and higher administrative levels. As a non-home rule, we're forced to have those individuals retire. As from a financial aspect, home rule communities, there's a better chance to become a AAA rated community. That's a rating bestowed by the rating agencies, whether it's S&P or Moody's. We are one stutter step away of that from a non-home rule standpoint, which is a credit to the board and prudent fiscal management. But really, it's that flexibility that's offered within home rule communities that the rating agencies really view as really the next step to get to a perfectly rated community for credit risk. Also, the opportunities for us to work with our local businesses with additional sources of revenue. We have the opportunity to create business type assistant grants or facade or aesthetic type grants that help encourage redevelop within the community and revitalization of some of our areas or downtown. So these are some distinct advantages that are afforded to home rule communities. The ability to generate additional revenues, how many home rule communities are able to increase the amount of reinvestment into the community. Infrastructure maintenance can be more of a shared responsibility. In addition to increasing the scope of our projects, new revenues can help fund shared community spaces or be reinvested into downtown beautification efforts. When Barrington residents leave the village to dine or shop in another community, they are paying home rule sales taxes to help improve that town. Whether it's Arlington Heights or South Barrington, more revenues are earned from those who visit and shop. It's important to note that with home rule sales tax, the tax is not levied upon groceries, medicine, or the sale of autos. It's assessed on discretionary type spending, typically restaurants and other retail sales. And the ability to generate more revenue through home rule sales tax often helps those communities to ease the burden on property tax. Home rule status does not have any immediate impact on the property tax. Often those who are opposed to home rule will cite property tax as a primary concern. To put things into context, on the screen is a graphic depiction of what $1 of property tax looks like and what the various allocations are. As you can see on the far right of the screen, the village is responsible for 7% of the property tax bill. So each one of those colors represents a distinct governing body that manages their own property tax levy. The village is able to maintain such a small percentage of the bill through diversification, where it's permitted as a non-home rule community, of its revenue sources and prudent fiscal management by the elected board. Second, the village board has adopted an ordinance that the village would abide by the same tax caps that the village is limited to as a non-home rule community. That being said, as a home rule community with the ability to collect more revenue from non-residents, the pressure on the property tax is lessened. So back to the full service community discussion. All the village's core services are accounted for within the village's general fund, and that's depicted on the right in this pie chart. Based on our known current or our known service levels, our contract costs, repair or replacement of equipment, or any commodity costs, each year we go into a budget knowing we've got about 90%, 96% of our budget spoken for if we maintain the same level of service. That leaves about 5% of the budget to address any unforeseen expenditures, any additional capital improvements, which typically is expanding the scope of needed repairs to village infrastructure, and any added value initiatives, those that improve the quality of life in the community. And that could be community spaces, either for public gathering, dining, entertainment, or festivals, improvement to bike path connectivity, aesthetic improvements throughout the village, or incentives for economic development and revitalization. So that 5% of the general fund translates to about $800,000 per year to address anything that wasn't contemplated at the time the budget was put together. So if we happen to have a year where we've basically accounted for every expense and we didn't have anything break that we didn't at least have identified in the budget, if we were to turn around and for instance, take that 800,000 reinvested in our street program, that would buy us about 3/4 of a mile of repair. To put that into context, the village is responsible for about 47 miles of roadway. So as you can see, that just the road maintenance and the cost to keep on a recurring schedule of maintenance can be quite daunting. Each year, the village compiles a capital improvement plan. This is a 5-year plan that really identifies the village's capital needs, and they're tiered by priority. The highest priority projects are those that impact core services. If we don't perform the repair, we can't deliver services expected by the community. Anything that addresses safety concerns obviously ranks high in that list as well, or anything that we can do within the capital improvement program to mitigate traffic congestion also rates very high on that list. After we get through those priorities, we get into the things that improve the quality of life, the type of improvements that really enhance the village's brand. As our critical infrastructure ages, the total cost to address all the project continues to grow. Currently in our current 5-year program, we've got about 80 projects identified that need some attention from the village. So we budget as much as we can and defer the rest and try and figure out strategies each year to how we can stretch the maintenance dollar as far as it can go. And new revenues from home rule would be used to increase the level of funding for these village-wide improvements. And these would be paid in part by visitors from neighboring towns entering the village and enjoying what the community has to offer. So what you might hear or read is that home rule automatically increases the property tax. This is not true. And the board, as we discussed a little bit earlier, went a step further to assure the community by self-imposing a cap by ordinance that we will abide by the same limits that exist today as a non-home rule community. In reality, with additional home rule revenues, the need to increase the tax levy should lessen. You might hear someone say that once you are home rule, you can never undo it. That also is not true. If the community is dissatisfied with the direction of the village after home rule, another referendum can be held to go back to non-home rule governance. Questions about home rule sometimes center on how will this improve the community and how will the additional revenues be spent. The community improves through a stronger local voice in decisions that impact all residents, potentially less reliance on property taxes, more ability to increase the amount of repairs on roads and key infrastructure, and more flexibility to address community wants as expressed through citizen engagement. You might hear that it's rare that communities are able to hold successful referenda on home rule. Almost 70% of home rule communities attain that status through the ballot. The others attained it by population. there is some key dates. I do want to thank you again for your time and willingness to learn about home rule. And I hope you've become a more informed voter, and I will turn the presentation over to Kate for any questions.
Yes. Okay, we do have some questions coming in, but again, feel free to use that box at the bottom of your screen. Just click on it and you can type questions in there. So someone asks, what would happen if we do not become home rule?
We would remain non-home rule. And so we would not receive those additional abilities that are provided to home rule communities. One of the issues Scott addressed in the presentation, one of our concerns is keeping on a infrastructure maintenance plan that is timely and and makes it more affordable to do our roads. We had a plan for several years of trying to do road improvements on a 25-year schedule. We are way off of that schedule now with the cost of road repairs. So, that's one of the issues. If we do not become home rule, we are going to fall further behind in keeping up with our basic infrastructure, roads, sidewalks, so forth. We will not be able to do a crime-free housing ordinance. And that is something that members of the community have asked us about for several years now. From time to time, we have had issues with some problem tenants and have had a very difficult time in addressing that. And so that's an easy tool for the community to have and to use, and would be very helpful to have. So basically, if it doesn't pass, we remain non-home rule, and we would not acquire those additional abilities. Scott, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that answer, but
I think you summarized that, the high points of what we would lose out in remaining as a non-home rule community.
I guess one more I'd add, and that is we keep talking about the ability to make decisions locally and be more independent from Springfield. Obviously, if we don't become home rule, then we are limited to the things that the folks in Springfield let us do, and we do not have as much ability to pivot when things come our way, when some of their unfunded mandates are handed down and we're not able to make change or do something different that helps us to cope with those unfunded mandates. That is, again, something that is important to municipalities seeking home rule. We wouldn't have that.
Great. Someone's asking, if we become home rule, does that mean my taxes are going to increase?
No, I'm sorry.
No, go, Scott.
So, no, there's no automatic increase that comes with home rule. Actually, the burden on the property tax often is lessened in home rule communities as additional sources of revenue come into play. So, and again, the board did put that ordinance into effect that really we are, if the vote becomes yes and we become a home rule community, that we would have the same tax cap, the same restrictions that we currently abide by now.
So that piggybacking off of that, what is the current tax cap for non-home rule as adopted in the ordinance? Is it a rate or percentage?
So it is what the PTEL, the tax cap limitation that the state sets for non-home rule communities, and that is the cost of living or 5%, whichever is less. So it's been less than 5% for many years. Not sure where it'll end up this year, but so that is the state requirement for the tax cap. And I'll just add to what Scott said a minute ago. We have talked about property taxes and capping those, and no intention there. We have also talked about the home rule sales tax, and you heard references to that in Scott's presentation. So the village board has been discussing doing a 1% home rule sales tax. And again, that's not on groceries. It's not on prescription drugs. It's not on car sales. It is on things more discretionary income, dining in a restaurant, for instance. And the reason that we're talking about that is because we do have those infrastructure needs, and we want to be able to keep up with those and keep our road program on a timely basis and make the repairs that we need to do and make the improvements that people have asked us for, beautification in the village and so forth. But that is the discussion as far as taxes.
Great. Will residents of unincorporated areas of Barrington be able to vote on this?
No, so this is voters who reside in the village of Barrington are the folks who will have this question on their ballot. If you don't live in the village and you see it on your ballot, you might want to report that issue. No, it shouldn't be there. So it should be only on ballots for Village of Barrington residents.
Great. Is there state or other funding that is lost if we become home rule?
No,
No, yeah, any
Yeah.
of the grant programs, and I will say staff is very aggressive in seeking grants to further some of our capital investment, but there really is no distinction between a home rule and a non-home rule community as we seek outside funding.
Why is the realtor community so vigorously opposed to Barrington becoming home rule? What is the rationale for the opposition? And is this related to concerns about home values?
so let me start with that. So on the property tax issue, I think we've addressed that by we're going to employ the cap and not go up. I would say though, when I think about that issue, I think about and property values in particular, I think about our neighbors, Barrington Hills, Lake Barrington, South Barrington, Inverness, that are all home rule communities and do not see any issue with their property tax values or dare say their property taxes. I think some of those communities have reduced them over the years. So on the tax issue, check that. That does not make sense that realtors who understand our community would have an issue with that. I've seen some information talking about a real estate transfer tax. So that is a tax that some home rule communities had put in place and have put in place on the transfer of real estate, which means when you're going to sell it, there would be this additional tax that the seller would have to pay. That used to be an automatic tax. A home rule community could automatically put that in place. In 1997, 25 years ago, the legislature made the imposition of a transfer tax on real estate. It would have to be a subject of a second referendum, even if a community were home rule. So a home rule community could put that referendum question on their ballot and impose a transfer tax. Barrington, if it becomes home rule, that would not be automatic. We're not looking to do that, and we would not be able to do that without a second referendum. So I don't, that transfer tax information may be a little not reflecting what is the current reality in the law. The landlord and the tenant issues. So sometimes we talk about crime-free housing, and crime-free housing allows a municipality to ask landlords, to have landlords put in their tenant leases a provision that basically says if you commit certain criminal behavior on the property, on the leased premises, the landlord can and will evict you. The communities around us that are home rule, many of them have those provisions in their leases, and they are effective tools when, and rarely again, it happens in Barrington, but it has happened, you get a problem tenant who is creating an issue on a property. So we are looking, if home rule were passed, to put provisions like that in place, which aren't going to affect most people at all. However, for a realtor, a property owner, a rental property owner, this is something that they would have to address. Obviously, it doesn't sound very burdensome if you've got if you're running your property properly, but it may be a reason that they would object. Realtors might object to that, having to have that crime-free provision. It certainly is something that the community and residents who have lived in a building with that kind of problem or adjacent to them have asked us to look at, and it certainly makes sense from the community perspective. The realtors might have a little different take on that. And I think those are the three main reasons I can think of, I've seen something recently about property inspections, pre-sale property inspections. There are some communities, home rule communities, and sometimes it's related to that transfer tax issue that would require a pre-sale inspection when you go to sell your house. Actually, non-home rule communities can have a pre-sale inspection ordinance. So in theory, Barrington could be doing that right now. We have not done that. We have no intention of doing that, but it's not something additional that comes with home rule. So.
Great. What are the checks and balances to the additional flexibility that home rule would offer? For example, will there be voting on what these extra funds are allocated towards?
We set our budget annually, and so when we have all of our revenue is allocated in our budget, and we work along through that during the year. And there's always a budget, several meetings usually where we're discussing the budget, and then we and of course the community is invited to engage in any of that. There's a particular project that we're considering doing with some of that revenue. Those are open for discussion. The budget has to be posted at least 30 days before it's approved, and the community has access to looking at what we're spending funds on. Everything is in there, and of course can come in and comment and talk about it, discuss it before it's approved. Scott, did I think of anything else?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the budget process is a very open and transparent process. Likely, we often have 5 to 6 public meetings about various aspects of the budget that cascade down to the full budget presentation. As President Darch noted, it is open to public inspection. There is a public hearing on the document. And as far as a true up at the end of the year, there is an annual financial report or an audit that's done on how those funds are expended, with a comparison to what was the intended spend on the budget as well. So it is both of those documents are very public, and they are available on the village's website as well.
If home rule is adopted, how long will it be until we see the benefits, improved roads, beautification, etc.?
You want to start there, Scott?
Sure. So if the 1% that was noted in the presentation, home rule sales tax, went into play in January, it would take several months before we started receiving some of the funds. What would end up happening is as we receive the additional revenues, we would start modifying our capital improvement plan and our annual budgeting, and really increase the scope of these projects based on the revenue that was coming in. So there would be a public process as how we talk through our capital planning, but the dollars would be, programmed immediately, and we'd start increasing the scope. And then it just becomes really a priority discussion as where we should allocate the dollars to what type of infrastructure or asset.
Great. Hey, Kate, I want to double back for 1 second on another, just to give a little more perspective on one answer. And that is, I don't think people appreciate that 25% of the housing in Barrington is rental housing. I think when we live in our single family homes or in our subdivisions, we're not aware really of how much of the property, the housing in the village is rental. So just so people have some perspective on why, what's going on in the community.
Great. Where will the new revenue come from? Restaurants, retail, how much more would I have to pay to dine out? Only an additional 1%?
Yes, a home rule sales tax would be 1% on dining.
Yeah, on the sales that aren't exempt, which are the groceries, prescription drugs, and car sales, but on the other retail items at 1%. And so, and we keep talking about sharing that cost or that revenue really with the other folks who come in and dine in Barrington restaurants. So again, as we said, our neighbors from South Barrington, Barrington Hills, Lake Barrington, we love it. They come here and are using our restaurants and going to our stores. And that is just like we do when we go to their town to shop or dine. That helps certainly the village residents with some revenue coming in to support infrastructure that's getting used here.
Great. What would be the first thing you would do with the proceeds from home rule tax?
we'd be looking at infrastructure, looking at our needs, our critical needs within our capital improvement plan. We would also take a look at, what are some of the community, what have we been hearing from the community as far as creating some open spaces and really trying to figure out, it'd be a prioritization of dollars, but really take a look at trying to allocate the dollars. We're meeting critical needs, but we're also trying to meet some of the needs of the community or wants and desires of the community as far as investment in the downtown and again in those community spaces.
Great. Okay, this is a longer one. In a home rule community, are there freedoms in separating from some IDOT standards in its infrastructure management? Specifically, could Barrington review proven alternative and more sustainable methods of road repairs instead of the typical overlay process?
I would say, I mean, our staff is constantly looking at the newest technologies for road, let's say specifically to road maintenance. We are using various treatment products that once we have new pavement that's laid, we do use a product such as Reclamite that has proven to expand the life of pavement 3 to 5 years. And then it's really keeping a good list or inventory of streets and what their various conditions are and making sure that we get to the road to a position where we can maintain it. We don't have to rebuild it. So we always are looking at how we can stretch the dollar as far as we can to get as much maintenance completed within our limited budget dollars.
And yeah, and I'm not sure if the question is getting at to the difference, it's certainly been on everybody's mind lately with all of the road programs. Some of the roads in the community are IDOT roads. Main Street, IDOT is maintaining that, and they're doing that per their standards. Hart Road is at Lake County, and so Lake County has their qualifications. And then the village streets, the local roads, 47 miles worth, are what we are maintaining. So there are those various entities who are in charge of the various roads and road maintenance programs.
Great. What is the projected / estimated revenue of the 1% tax, resident versus non-resident?
Total revenue, we're estimating somewhere about $750,000 to $1 million. As far as the breakdown between non-resident, resident, we don't have definitive numbers from the Department of Revenue, but we would estimate that more than 50% is coming from non-residents.
Someone said, I've seen several comments on social media suggesting with some dismay that additional monies generated by home rule would go to support venues like the Barrington's White House. Is that likely to happen?
No, that's not on our, so happily, Barrington's White House has successfully created a capital reserve fund for the upkeep of the house itself, which was part of what our intention was, our goal was. And there's been a lot of fundraising done over the last few years, and we successfully hit the dollar amount to basically fund the maintenance schedule for the home for 50 years. And so it actually is in great shape and that is not an intended use or would be a use of these dollars that we're talking about.
Will home rule help address the vacant real estate, empty lots, few businesses? Seems like we will need to address this as well in order to boost non-village residents to come into our town.
Well, I think an aspect of that is, I mean, ultimately real estate transactions are between two private parties. We try and do whatever we can to help consummate deals, but I think indirectly through additional revenues, beautification efforts to tend to our infrastructure, sidewalks, pavers, those type of things, where you're enhancing the village's brand, that only makes the village more desirable to potentially have tenants or new operators seek out the village for locating their business.
Agreed.
Is there a home rule charter? Is there a document that summarizes the two questions? Is there a home rule charter, and is there a document that summarizes the difference between what non-home rule versus home rule communities can and cannot do?
So there's not a charter per se, and maybe that's kind of the point of home rule. essentially, if you look at a definition, it kind of works in reverse. I think this was at the beginning of your presentation, Scott, but non-home rule communities are limited to the powers that the state gives them. And that, and basically that's it. Home rule communities are free to do whatever, as long as the state hasn't preempted their ability to do it. So sometimes the state will pass a statute and say we're preempting home rule, which means everybody is going to live under whatever that statute says. So there's not really, so there's a lot of freedom in home rule, and in non-home rule, you have your rights or your abilities pretty much prescribed. I think the IML website has, it would be a good place to go look. That's the IllinoisMunicipalLeague.org or IML.org, has a good description of home rule and non-home rule, has some discussion on that. So that would be one resource to look at. But I'm trying to think if there's anybody else.
We have documents, the IML documents available on our home rule resource page as well.
Okay,
So
great.
folks can go to that. How would residents' opinions be taken into account when you are considering where and how to spend dollars?
I would say first
Besides
and
the
foremost,
Jewel, besides at the Jewel produce counter, where we often talk to people, but no, any and every way, at village board meetings for sure. We get emails from people, talking to any of us one-on-one, coming in, make an appointment, talk about it. But the usual forum is the board meeting, the committee of the whole meeting, public comment during those. I think many ways to express how people feel and have over the years on so many subjects.
and that's really a function of local government being the most accessible type of government. I mean, the elected representatives are at minimum, you can see them 3 times a month during board meetings. But again, yes, they're out among the community as well as the staff members. So we're constantly getting feedback from the community as to what they'd like to see or what needs to be repaired. All those conversations and discussions get really synthesized when we're looking at budgets and trying to figure out where we need to allocate dollars to address as many needs as we can.
Would the 1% tax include services as well as purchases?
No, there's no service tax.
Is there a plan for a dog park?
That's interesting. When people have asked that in the past, I think often remind them that the park district is the recreational unit of local government. And I think they've looked at that over the years. I think they've talked to Lake County about it as well at various times, but that's not one of the, that would be more in the park district's area of government services than the villages. And we don't have plans for one at this point. We don't have that.
A comment and a question. Seems like a pretty good decision to become home rule based on the presentation. Why are people so opposed?
I think some people are hearing messages like, property taxes could go up and be unlimited and what have you. I think we've tried to address that with the ordinance. And I think if people would actually look at the communities nearby us that have been home rule for years and recognize that that isn't something, I think also if you think reflectively about having more sales tax potentially or having other revenue sources, it really does take pressure off a community's need to increase property taxes. I like to say that being home rule really gives you the flexibility to lower property taxes, because as a non-home rule, you're so limited with the tax cap. And if you don't use it in 1 year, you've kind of lost revenue that you can't really pick up again. With home rule, you have a lot of flexibility. So I think the property tax scariness might be one of the things, and it shouldn't be scary. It really should not be. I think some of the information from regarding property and some of the realtor mailings may not be, are I think not hitting the mark and are a little bit incorrect in some of the, material, and people may be not maybe looking at that and not understanding and being turned off to it. But
And I think some of the concern is where the dollars can be spent. And I hope we've been transparent with that we are really looking to reinvest those dollars back into improving the infrastructure of Barrington and providing things that really provides a tangible benefit to all the residents.
Great. Given the benefits of home rule, why wasn't this a referendum vote sooner?
So Barrington did have this question 8 years ago on the ballot. It was not successful at that point. I would say that we have had enough requests from the community over the last few years. We've had some of the issues I talked about, and enough to the point where you recognize that it's time to ask the public to consider the question again. And I would say that's why it's now. And, we're looking at what's been going on with our keeping up with our intended and our goal in infrastructure maintenance, and that's not happening or hasn't been able to be happening. So I think those would be two of the reasons why now is now.
There have been comments online that this is taxation without representation. Can you explain if that is or isn't true and why?
Well, first, that the village board, the trustees, the village president, village clerk are all elected by the people in the community. And so, and again, it's local government. It is the closest to the folks. So truly, the people who are on the village board live in the community, and whatever ordinance or anything that's put into place, they have to live under as well. And so they're one of the neighbors, if you will. And so everyone in the community can find them and can talk to them and express their views on any issue, on taxes or whatever the issue may be. And if the elected officials, aren't responsive to that, then people have the power to vote, and that's a big power. Any taxation, any budget, any expenditures are discussed openly at public meetings, and people have the right, the chance, the opportunity, are encouraged to come in and express their views on any of those. And again, their elected representatives are listening to them. I don't know, what else would you add to that, Scott? Or
No, I think you summarized that very well.
Are there any specific examples or case studies of what surrounding home rule communities have done or accomplished using home rule proceeds?
using home rule proceeds? I would say one of them may be Lake Barrington. They have purchased a lot of open space, some pretty areas, the Friar Farm, I believe, and I think they have used their sales tax revenue, which would include home rule sales tax, for those purchases. So those improvements, they don't have, the kind of infrastructure that we have. Many of their roads are state or county, I believe, but they've used them for open space. Barrington Hills, I'm not certain if I'm looking at them. Other people, Arlington Heights, maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, Scott? Or
Sure. Arlington Heights, as a home rule community and creating their al fresco dining, were able to, they earmarked the home rule sales taxes that were generated through dining in that area to be reinvested to make sure that would be a sustainable program. So that all the home rule sales tax was reinvested in the barricades, site security, any costs related to keeping that program up, and also assisting the business, which was initially a boost through COVID, but that was really a home rule measure and some additional revenues that they had available that they could have that type of program. I would say a lot of economic development in home rule communities is creative uses of additional revenues to, again, to incent businesses to come in, to improve the space around those businesses or downtown districts. So a lot of where you see some redevelopment, there's some home rule revenues potentially assisting, or at least on the infrastructure around the downtowns and any efforts to revitalize the area.
Great. Okay, well, that is all we have for questions. We did get a comment. No question, just a comment. Thank you for the very coherent, helpful presentation of this topic and for having the multiple opportunities for us residents to learn about this topic over the last several and upcoming weeks. I appreciate our very competent village leaders. On that note, I do just want to share some upcoming opportunities. We ask you to invite your friends and neighbors to join us for additional home rule information meetings. We've got some virtual ones coming up and some in person. And then we also have a new series, an in-person series, Coffee and Conversation with Village Officials. We have 2 dates coming up where we will be talking specifically about home rule, Saturday, October 22nd at Starbucks on Main Street, and then Wednesday, November 3rd at Cook Street Coffee. Karen and Scott, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Just to say thank you to folks for tuning in. Hope they didn't miss, I don't know what's going on in the Bears game, but thank you for paying attention to this important topic. And if people have follow-up questions, they can email those questions to us at the Village and we'd be happy to respond.
Yeah, you can send them over to me, Kay Himes, HIM as in Michael ES at barrington-il.gov. And we'll get those answered for you.
I'd say thank you for your time and the great questions.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Kate and Scott.
Thank you.
Good night
Thank you.
all.
Have a great night.